for this reading from Psalm, the fourth one. Answer me when I call, O God of my right. You gave me room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me. Hear my prayer. How long, you people, shall my honor suffer shame? How long will you love vain words and seek after lies? Selah. But know that the Lord has set apart the faithful for himself. The Lord hears when I call to him. When you're disturbed, do not sin. Ponder on your beds and be silent. Selah. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in the Lord. There are many who say, "Oh, that we might see something good." Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. You have put gladness in my heart, more than when grain and wine abound. And I will lie down, and I will sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me to lie down in safety. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, I'm just so pleased to be able to welcome you to First Christian. Pleased to welcome you as hopefully another follower of Jesus, because that's what we're about. We're following Jesus. And I, at the front here, kind of want to just ask you a question about what's keeping you up late at night. What is it that's keeping you late at work? What is it that has you on the phone with experts asking for their opinion? What has you right now anxious in prayer, where you're just pouring out your heart to the Lord? What is it? And today, whatever that is in your heart, I want you to welcome it into the sanctuary. I want you to bring it in here. Those worries, those concerns, those pressures that you feel on you. Because in this series, Arrive 25, we are preparing ourselves for the coming of Christ. I mean, right now we're doing a lot of preparations, right? We're preparing ourselves with food. We're figuring out where people are going to sleep, what our travel arrangements are. All these things that we're preparing, isn't it maybe a good idea for us to prepare ourselves? To get our heart ready to welcome Jesus on December 25th. Even to welcome Jesus in 2025, to welcome him into our lives and into our schedule. Today, we lit the fourth candle, the candle of peace. And each week we've had a different candle and a different word of hope and faith and joy. And today, peace. And peace may be the last descriptor word for you in your life right now. You're not feeling peace whatsoever. You're feeling chaotic, disordered, lonely. You're feeling like whatever you do fails. Maybe we're feeling like just one big gigantic sigh. Can we all sigh? And peace may be the farthest thing from you in your life. There's no glassy, clear lake of stillness in your world. The leaves are not still like that, like those on a picture. And yet, I'm inviting you to bring all of this anxiety and to package it in the box of peace. And the way that I want to do that today is with this psalm that I read to you. It's an unusual psalm in that it has the first person. It's a personal psalm. A lot of times we think about these songs as maybe we could bring it into worship, as a corporate song. But this psalm says I. It's about us. And I want you to imagine this Psalm 4 as Mary and Joseph's bedtime prayer. You know, they would have been internalizing the Psalms as Israel's prayer book. They would have had them close to our hearts. I don't know that this was their bedtime psalm, their bedtime prayer, but that's what I want us to do today, is to imagine that it is their bedtime prayer on a night when they have no bed. Nowhere to go. No place, no space, no room for them. And by looking at the psalm in this way, I hope that we'll open up maybe something more of the story that is so familiar to us. A story where Mary is ready to pop. She is in pain. She is in distress. It is the night of birth. And Joseph's no short of anxiety. He wants to just find a still place, a quiet corner, some little moment of privacy away from everyone. I mean, donkey travel on Christmas Eve, that's a bad choice. And add that into being pregnant and having to go back to where your family comes from to be counted, to go through some government ordeal on Christmas Eve. And yet, the prayer that they pray, this prayer of wanting room, is one that I want us to keep in the back of our mind. Because even in the very first line, God, you made space for me. You made room for me. A couple of summers ago, we were able to do a senior trip for both Lizzie and Nathan, and we went to the UK. And it was great. But it was a very tightly packed trip. In this particular trip, whenever we just finally decided, okay, we're going to buy the tickets, we're going to pull the trigger, we'll figure out the plans later. And pretty much everything came together quite well. But there was this one 24-hour period that even months in advance of our travel was very hard for me to find somewhere to stay. We only had one day in Edinburgh. And we thought, okay, we can do what we need to do in Edinburgh. That's great. But I could not find a room. Not on Airbnb, not on Booking.com, not any hotel. Repeatedly trying to find something. Even rental cars. There were no rental cars. And I was pulling my hair out until I finally figured out. Harry Styles. Harry Styles was coming to Edinburgh. I don't like Harry Styles anymore, maybe ever. And so the way that I worked around this was, okay, we'll spend our day in Edinburgh, but I'll just book a late night train and we'll travel over to Glasgow. And I found one place, a bed and breakfast, where we could stay. Perfect. So we're on the train. We're up early. We're ready. We're headed to Edinburgh. And as we about pull into Edinburgh, I get an email that says, your hotel reservation has been canceled. I get a phone message where they say, I'm sorry, but we've had a plumbing leak. We can't have you. What? I mean, what are we supposed to do? It already was so hard to plan somewhere to stay, and now on the day of, we have nowhere. That changed everything about our view of that day. Now, we are not pregnant at this time. We're not bearing the Son of God. It's a different story, right? And yet for me, in that moment of not knowing where I was going to stay and having my entire family, it was one that made me resonate with the pain of not having space, not having a place. That's the kind of imagination that I want you to bring to this story of Mary and Joseph probably praying this prayer of just wanting a place to sleep, a place to sit down, a place to give birth to a child, peace from the circumstances that press in on them. And so the psalm, answer me, O Lord my God, of my right hand, my vindicator. Show up, give me space. You know, when we call out to God, sometimes when people say God, they're using it as a curse word. And yet here is a prayer calling out to God and saying, hey, I'm in distress. And I think it's just a perfect representation of maybe what Joseph and Mary felt on this night. The desire, the panic that sets in, maybe quite different from the streets of Glasgow, but something that we can learn from. Now, I promised you today, I promised you that I would give you something very practical. Because if we're going to bring all of these anxieties and stressors and things that we're obsessed about into the sanctuary today, what are we going to do? There are three things that I want to point out to you that I'll mention rather quickly that give us a way that we can practice dealing with our difficulties. Are you ready? The very first one has already been spoken. Cry out to God. Call out to God. Let God know exactly what it is that you're wrestling with. God hears. Despite your circumstances showing you the exact opposite, God is very aware of what you are facing, aware of what is up against, what you're up against. And it is your job to call out to God, to make God give you a hearing for what you're going through. And yet, sometimes we don't do this. We are fabricating our own answers. We're trying to generate them on our own. And what I'm telling you to do in this first move is to verbalize it, to really say it directly to God. Answer me, O God, about this. You're my vindicator. You're the one I'm calling to. There's something about verbalizing it that validates it. It's actually a move of faith to say, God, here it is. This is what I'm going through. And to admit that obstacle, admit that problem that you're facing, and name it. God, I have a pregnant wife. I need a room. I have nowhere to go. This isn't even my baby. It's yours. God, show up and make space for us, saying it aloud. Well, the second thing, not only do you just verbalize it, but this second one comes in verse 4. When you are disturbed, sit and ponder. Lay down and ponder on your beds. Okay. Brady, I don't know. Really? Yes. Lay down and ponder the presence of God on your bed. When you're disturbed, when you're angry, don't sin. All right, well, we're going to have to go a little deeper into this, right? I mean, what? How can I just lay down? Well, this desire is a desire, this move is a desire not to act, not to speak, not to have to fix the problem right away, but to let God begin to speak in the silence. A lot of times we're prone to move quickly. When it says don't sin, but lay down on your bed, it's saying don't move too quickly. Don't act flippantly. Don't say the word crossly so quickly. Stop and pause. Now, this laying down, you're there laying down on your bed, probably with your arms crossed. That's a stupid idea Brady's given us. This is not a time to stew on the problem, to turn it over in your mind, to think about all the people that are against you, to begin to construct all kinds of scenarios and situations where you are the one that is being attacked. It's a time to be still. Did you notice when I read this psalm that I said the word Selah and then I stopped? A lot of times we don't read that in the text, the word Selah. Little note, no one knows what it means. It's a Hebrew word. Scholars like to write huge papers about this one little word. The best guess is that it's some kind of a musical notation. Probably even a musical notation to stop, to pause, to be still. These Selah moments are very important. We do this as a staff on a regular basis. You know how we always will welcome our guests and welcome you to submit prayer cards? Well, in our prayer time, the way that we typically start is I'll read a passage 3 times. But I'll read it through very slowly once, and then we'll pause and stop and sit. And then I'll read it through again, and we'll pause and stop and sit, sometimes for an uncomfortable amount of time. Not long enough that anyone's gone to sleep, that I've noticed, but a long period of time to simply be still. Whenever you dwell in God and dwell in God's presence, I'm not going to tell you that everything stops. Because like even now, there are monkey thoughts. You know what a monkey thought is? Just jumps up on the tree. You're thinking of all these things that you have to do, and you start chasing the monkeys away. Go away, monkeys. They pop up. But you have to let them do their own thing while you dwell in the presence of God. You're still. You rest your shoulders. You begin to realize how tightly you're clenching your jaw. You realize the muscles in your forehead, how firm they are. And you begin to let yourself rest and be still and meditate on the presence of God. All right, so far we've called out to God. Answer me, God. And we've laid down on our bed. The third one is verse 5. Offer right sacrifices and put your trust in God. Okay, once again, this seems a little too religious, right? Offer right sacrifices, put your trust in God. Again, we've got to go a little deeper in this. We might know what a sacrifice is. Something that you go and you put on a stone altar. Maybe it's an animal that you're going to partially cook and then eat. Maybe it's an animal that gets totally burned up, a whole burnt offering. Or maybe it's wine or grain that you're offering, you're giving away. That's kind of foreign to us, right? We don't think about putting things on an altar of stone or wood or just giving things away. So how do we make sense of that for us today? What does that look like? Well, maybe we can think of it in a different way. Whenever we got off the train and we were hitting Edinburgh to have our big fun day in Edinburgh, we had our bags with us. Maybe this could be like checking your bags. What we needed to do is not be having our squeaky wheel suitcases all over Edinburgh. And so we had set up an arrangement where there's basically a convenience store. You hand over your bag, you check your bag with someone else, and they put a tag on it, and you can walk away, freed of that burden. And that allowed us to then get on the phone and begin to call hotels and begin to find on the line where there might be a place to go. Perhaps this making of a right sacrifice is like checking a bag, where you're letting go of something that's big. You're putting it out of your sight. You're not obsessing about it. Maybe it's like when you have to finally give your calendar over to someone else, to let them tell you, okay, this is going to go on and this is not going to go on. This is how you're going to go about your day. Maybe it's your trip to Goodwill, when you load up all of your junk. And maybe some of that junk is not junk. You really love it. And you're kind of hesitant. You might want to pull it back. But you know you haven't used it. And you know it's better to let somebody else use it. Any one of those examples is what it's being talked about with offer right sacrifice. Take something and give it to God and let God have it. Now, this is a method that I'm telling you can work. When you call out to God, when you still and calm yourself, when you offer right sacrifices and truly put your trust in God, this is something that works. And yet there I was on the phone with the only phone that had a UK number, calling 10 hotels, 20 hotels, 30 hotels, 40 hotels, 50 hotels. I'm kidding you not. Donna on her phone looking and finding on booking.com, 0% of units available. Airbnb, 0 units available. Hotels.com, 0 available. It's one thing to say, hey, do these 3 things. It's another thing to do them. And we finally decided that we needed to just get on that train early and go to Glasgow and go door to door to door to each one of these. You know, in our lives, sometimes we're so focused on the problem that the problem becomes God to us. It takes all of our attention, consumes all of our energy. We're so worried about it that there's really no room for God at all. We've crowned God, and God is our problem that we're obsessed about. We're dragging it around like lead weights. And the funny thing is that it's usually a problem that we can't even fix. It's like we're a kid leaning against a boulder, trying to push that boulder. Are they going to make any progress? A kid pushing a boulder? No, not even an adult. The strongest one in the room couldn't push this boulder, and yet we're trying. We're slapping God's hands away because we say we've given it to God in prayer, but we're still hanging on to it for ourselves. Verbalizing what's going on, sitting in stillness before God, and offering right sacrifices that turn our attention to God is the right move. What was the biggest bag that you had to check? Do you remember when you had to check a really big bag? I had to check one when they didn't weigh it before they put it on the plane. Oh, thank you. I had just begun my doctoral work, and you had to read, like 6,000 or 8,000 pages, which is about 30 books or so, 30, 40 books. And for this first class, I didn't know. I'm flying for a 2-week intensive. I've spent 6 weeks getting ready. Do I take all the books? And I thought, I better take all the books. I don't know. So I put them all in a bag, and it's heavy. Oh, it's so heavy. It's this gigantic bag. And I wheel it up. I felt pretty strong when this happened, but I just kind of set it over for the guy. And the guy, whose job it was to, at the curb, check the bags, just about ripped his back out. And he went over, I kind of hobbled over. He got a sticker marked heavy, another sticker marked heavy, put it on there, and he took it away. I was so relieved I didn't have to carry that bag around. It was gone. And you know, when I got to the class, when I got to the time, I knew, you began to realize I didn't need these books. The professor wasn't expecting me to construct a shelf and put all these books on the shelf. The professor wanted to know what I'd learned from the experiences, what those books had taught me, how I had internalized those things. The books were irrelevant at that point. Letting God's presence be enough for us is a huge thing. So many things in our life we're dragging around, like we need to carry them around, and yet letting the light of God's presence shine upon us. Look at verse 6 and 7. There are many who say, "Oh, that we might just see some good." Let the light of your face shine upon us, O Lord. You've put gladness in my heart more than when grain and wine abound. The light of God's presence shining upon us. This is the oldest blessing of all, from Numbers 6, 23 and 24. About God making his face shine upon us, lifting his countenance upon us, and giving us peace. A peace that comes not from us, doesn't originate from me or from my circumstances or even what I'm doing. It's a peace that originates from God, where I'm not troubled by the burden and the question and the obstacle that's there, but I'm giving that back to God. Now, is the answer instant? Does the circumstance automatically fix itself? No. Mary and Joseph, in praying this prayer, I don't know that it was Psalm 4. We're imagining, right? In praying this prayer of Psalm 4, they got a place to be, a place to dwell, and yet Mary's still pregnant. Still has to go through the pain of delivering this baby. They're still traveling. They still are far away from their home. All of the circumstances are still pretty much the same. This year in December, Christianity Today put an image on their cover, and it's a picture of a street scene. And you see a tent encampment in the middle, just like a homeless person's tent encampment. But if you look really close, it's not just a homeless person's tent encampment. If you're able to zoom in on it with your eyes, you'll see that it looks like a nativity scene. So what looks like a normal street where, more homeless people, are really Joseph and Mary. They're trying to find space. The situation doesn't change. It remains the same. As Donna and the kids and I went house to house to house, to hotel to hotel to hotel, no one had any room. The hotels would call other hotels, there wasn't space. So we would walk to the next hotel with our squeaky wheeled bags that we'd reclaimed from Glasgow. We finally got to one hotel, and she began doing the same thing, calling, and she said, "You know what we can do? You can just stay in the lobby. I'll check your bags. I'll take your bags." And so again, we were checking our bags like we'd done earlier in the day. She put them in the back and protected them, which allowed us to not look like targets. What we realized is that this was not only a Harry Styles concert weekend, bad Harry Styles, it also was essentially the Super Bowl. They had a huge soccer football match between two local teams, and so we saw not only Harry Styles' boa feathers everywhere, but these two colors and people drunk and chanting. Not only was it those two things, but it was a bank holiday weekend. So it's spring break, Super Bowl, Harry Styles. There wasn't going to be a room. And yet we had this woman who let us sleep in the lobby, who checked our bags, who gave us a place to be. Peace is not going to be the absence of war. It's not going to be the elimination of all conflict. Your difficulties will not be removed. And yet you can still seek the light of God's presence. Still welcome into your life the gladness. A gladness that surpasses when you have all that you need. Grain, wine abound. Last week when we talked about Mary making space for God to be born through her, the Son of God, Jesus. And this week, we're talking about God making space for us. If you look back again to the first verse, the way this psalm begins, "Answer me, O God, when I call, O God of my right. You gave me a room when I was in distress. Be gracious to me and hear my prayer." A lot of the versions wipe that away. You miss the idiom. The idiom that actually is said there is, "In a narrow place in my life, you make space." When things are tight and pressed, God, you make space. You push the crowds back and give me a place to lie down and be in safety. And then in verse 3, God sets apart his faithful. He protects them. He puts boundaries around them. With this picture in our minds, with the nativity maybe in our hearts this week, I've got a final question for you today. What does it mean to have the Son of God as a baby asleep in a manger? What does that mean? What does that teach us about our life and this world? In fact, I'm going to say the word Selah and just pause for a minute. What does that fact teach us? That God is asleep in a manger. Selah. I won't make you last long. But I think God teaches us something pretty profound. That if God can be put in the position of the most vulnerable baby, not in a normal place, not at home, not in a normal crib at all, but in a trough for animals. If God can put God's self in that place, then this is a world that's safe. Is there chaos and clatter and difficulty around us? Oh, yes. But this is a world that God has firmly in his control. In our crazy and chaotic and distressed world, and in this season when our hearts are really hard to settle, I invite you to call out to God, to cry out to God. I invite you to be still, even lay down and ponder the presence of God. I invite you to check your bags. Make right sacrifices. Because when you do, you will find room to sleep. Room to sleep in the most safe place of all, in the arms of the eternal God. Let's pray. God, we want to be yours, and yet we so act on our own. So God, help us. Help us to call out to you, to admit our vulnerability, to admit our weakness, to be still and lay down in your presence. God, we ask this because we know that you're one we can offer these things to. Because you not only make us lay down, but you allow us to sleep. May we trust you more than we trust ourselves, more than we trust our view of this world, more than we trust the disorder that is around us, but may we trust you. And we ask this through Jesus, who showed us this path, the Jesus who lives and reigns with you in the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.